Thank you, Mark. How about that music? I'm showering the love. I remember an affirmation that says, I'm a dynamic center of the Christ light, mighty to unfold my love and to radiate that love to all others. And so that's what we're doing this morning. As always, it's a joy and a privilege for me to be here. And on the way here this morning, at a time when the word media meant something differently than it does now, and I was teaching a media course to college students, we often looked at the subliminal messaging in advertising. And it's been interesting for me to notice that our two cultures, although geographically in such proximity, there are notable differences in the billboard messages. A case in point that somewhat relates to the talk title this morning, First Things First. I saw the billboard that said, and it was for what you call pop. No, you call it soda. We call it pop. And it said, the value you didn't know you needed. What? The Canadian in me went, I'm sorry? You're now telling me the values that I need? So it's rather interesting that with First Things First, we are going to consider our priorities and our values by way of recognizing them, bringing consciousness to them. The scripture that has inspired the message that I'm privileged to share is taken from 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 40. And it's the last in a series of admonitions about how to do church. And this part reads, verse 40 says, but everything should be done in a fitting and orderly way. Everything should be done in a fitting and orderly way. Certainly we know that in our philosophy, the month of September is dedicated to the spiritual faculty of order. And Charles Fillmore defines order in a way that neither speaks to its connotation as giving a command in a military sense, nor does it address the common usage of the word order as making a request. He says order in the spiritual realm is an adjustment. So we come together this morning to consider our priorities, our values, and to consider to what extent the life that we are living is reflecting the order of priority in those values. From a long history of being trained to over-prepare, at any given time, my message seems to have at least 3 layers. So I have for you this morning what I do consciously, deliberately to take inventory of how order is functioning in my life. And that's 3 easy steps. Then I have something for you which many of you have been in Unity longer than I have. And so you may have done this exercise, which actually is provided in First Things First, a book written by Stephen Covey. I think probably I was led by a Unity minister in a workshop on this exercise somewhere in the early 90s. And you know how many of those seminars and workshops we've done. And I've never quite forgotten that one. And perhaps it's just because it speaks to my ever increasing awareness of my mortality. And so perhaps we'll start with that this morning. This inspirational lead-in to Covey's exercise is taken from the Tibetan book titled Glimpse After Glimpse, Daily Reflections on Living and Dying. And it reads, this existence of ours is as transient as autumn clouds. To watch the birth and death of being is like looking at the movements of a dance. A lifetime is a flash of lightning in the sky, rushing by like a torrent down a steep mountain. Amen? Indeed. So Stephen Covey invites us into a funeral home where a wake has begun. And I must hand it to the Catholics. I was in such a place just on Friday, and the pomp and the ritual is second to none. Just the beauty of the incense being wafted over the corpse. Anyway, let's go back to our exercise and see if this has any value for how you create order and access the spiritual faculty of order on a daily basis. In my case, I hold myself to a moment-by-moment consciousness of the presence within. So you've walked into this funeral home, and there's a wake going on, and you recognize quite a few of the people. You notice that there are friends and people that you worked with in the past, and most of the members of your family. And it's only when you move closer to the coffin that you notice this is your funeral. Fun? Can I hear a hooray? You know, in the West, we are noticeably averse. We are averse to the concept of our corporal finality and quite intoxicated by youth. So this is an exercise that actually I find myself rises in consciousness every once in a while. It's an internal one, purely an internal experience. And I suppose for me, it's a kind of inventory of what I feel that I have succeeded in terms of living the life that I've been given, and also to notice what perhaps I may have contributed by way of serving humanity and of expanding my soul. The time for this seems to be right now, right here, this morning, together. And we really enter a different order and realm of appreciating ourselves and of honoring all the relationships that have happened up until this moment in our lives, when we can accept that each one of us is valuable, that each one of us has what I call sacred uniqueness. So just take that part in for a moment. I am sacredly unique. And now you're back in the funeral home and you realize that all of these people have gathered in order to speak to your legacy and honor your life. So I'm going to do the exercise with you out loud. And I just invite you, if it's something that helps you to reprioritize how your daily living is aligned with, in harmony with, what you value most. And so a person steps up to speak from your family. Whoa, there's the big one, right? So I'm sure my family of origin would have a very different report on me than what I consider my nuclear family of my children and grandchildren. Let me just say that briefly, I have always been perceived as an anomaly in my family of origin, and I wear that with a badge. So I imagine they'd have quite a bit to say about that. My children, I hope, would say that the one thing I sought to imprint in their consciousness, besides the 5 B's from the time they were verbal, I am bright, I am beautiful, I am blessed, I am beloved, and I am bountiful. Besides those 5 B's, their teacher, minister, mother often would say, do not ever lose sight of the fact that as long as you are in this spacesuit, you have one mission to accomplish. And that is to carve out your little spot of sunshine and be joyful. That's it. You came here to glorify God in your joyfulness. And I watch them and I tear up as they very systematically remove from their path anything that appears to compromise their joy. That's what my kids would say. Forgiveness is a big part of going to your own funeral. And I can tell you that both the people that I worked with for decades, as well as the thousands of students that I was blessed to learn from, would probably say similar things. I guess there's this thing online that came to my attention years after I'd retired. And apparently my name was showing up there where kids could rate you. And so students tended to have very opposing views of me. They either loved me or called me the B word. So there you go. I kind of know what they would say. And I will tell you that I have no regrets about being the disciplinarian. The longer I stayed in that career, the more deeply my awareness was that youth required parameters and boundaries, but they also needed desperately someone with the courage to follow through on consequences. So when the administration of the various institutions that I was employed with became disinterested, shall we say, in consequences, I became my own little island of discipline until I got busted because someone thinking that narcissism was called for in an English classroom would be asked to step outside the door and don't let it hit you on the way out, and God help you if you're not there when I come and look for you. However, how that often backfired is that the administrator roaming the halls probably, well, let me not say that comment. Roaming the halls came upon this poor child who had been ostracized. The only thing I have that really surpasses that, and I'm really quite proud of it because it took me a long time to find my voice. So apparently when I did, it got misconstrued. In my last ministry, someone reported me to Unity Canada as being the most heartless minister she had ever met. I went, yay, really? So we grow, we evolve, we do our best, and I ask forgiveness of those students who got to stay in the room and whom I did not grant 1 ounce of selfishness, I suppose. For me, serving humanity is what we are all called to do. And while I always invited them to have their own thoughts, I also reminded them that we are connected. And as my teaching career came to a close, more and more, I was talking about consciousness. I was talking about your real life, and I was talking to them about mortality. So with this exercise, I will tell you that my colleagues said this often enough to me in frustration, so they'd probably say it if they decided to even come to my funeral. They would sit and nudge me in faculty meetings because whatever they were grumbling about under their breath, I would say, you're probably right. And so then they would say to me, I might make some quip back, supporting. And they're like, well, why don't you get up and say that? Stand up and say it. And I said, because I do not put my energy where it is not valued, heard, or received. And they'd be so mad at me. You could be so articulate. You could say that. But I was very, very vigilant around where. And I remain that way. Where I expend my energy is one of my top values. So I will leave Stephen Covey's exercise by just repeating that it's a meaningful one for me, and that a couple of questions that I ask myself whenever I come back to it is, what would I imagine they would say that would please me? What do I imagine they would say that might surprise me, or even be a call up higher? Because guess what? We all still have time to affect that legacy. There was a little story I came across about a teacher in terms of, their answer to what difference have I made by being on planet Earth for 70 and maybe more than 10. And what this teacher decided to do with her seniors who were graduating is that she manufactured a bunch of blue ribbons with yellow stenciling on them, which simply said, and I love it that God's name was in it, who I am makes a difference. Who I am makes a difference. So one of the students took his and he gave it to a junior executive who had significantly influenced him about his career choice. And that particular executive went to work and gave it to his boss. That boss seemed to have the most discomfort with the ribbon, and he went home and gave it to his teenage son. Until that moment, his son had perceived his father to be uncaring, gruff, and silent. When his dad handed him the ribbon, he said, do you really think that, Dad? That who I am makes a difference? And his father was speechless and hugged him so that the son could later share with him the juncture at which the son had found himself in despair, having no real reason to value his life. So in bringing this Stephen Covey exercise from First Things First to a close, I feel really blessed to be able to tell you my 3-step method for gauging the spiritual faculty of order being active in my life in a way that pays tribute to or accurately reflects what I say that I value. So of course it goes without saying, I used to do this all the time under the auspices of an English class, and occasionally I get called on it. What does this have to do with English? Only everything, I would say. The question is, what are my top 3 values? I can't possibly take regular inventory of whether I am putting first things first in how I live in the outer unless I've taken responsibility for naming my top 3 values. And so my 3 steps are simply expressed in these 3 words: peace, poise, and power. So I leave these with you this morning, and I invite you to notice if they might work for you, because they have never failed me. Because when I sit to remind myself that herein lies the peace of God, when I sit to have an experience of God, of my real self, where I cannot be separate from source, I have peace. I have that peace which each one of us has been promised, that is not peace as the world gives it. And so herein lies the peace of God. That's my top value, peace of mind. I suppose because on 2 major occasions in my life I lost mine, and I think once you find it, at least once I found it, you never misplace it. You know that it's right here, one with the mind of God. That peace brings poise. What do you define as poise? If I asked you to give me a synonym, somebody give me one. Judy, what's a synonym for poise? Oh, I like that. Thank you. I think I'll keep that one. Poise for me is equated with calm. If you came from a screaming Italian family like I do, you might have worked on calm as well. From that peace comes poise. And guess what? It is only when I effect that kind of serenity, that graciousness, that calm within, that I become a transparency for the will of God. That I am open, receptive, responsive, and obedient to the power that is always seeking to live me. Can we embrace it today? Yes. I thank you. I love you. I bless you, and I invite you to your funeral if you like.